Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second installment of colonization or colonial settlement and early colonization. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I'll be your guide on this journey. Right now, I want to spend some time talking about some specifics of New England, and to help me, I'm going to use some PowerPoint slides by a Miss Susan M. Poher. She is a very well, at least within AP circles, a very well-known social studies teacher, and those of us who started our AP teaching journeys learned a great deal from her and her resources, so we appreciate hers. This is a shout out to her, and I'm going to make use of these resources because I think you should benefit from them too, because they're pretty much good times. All right, so let's talk pilgrims, right? Okay, so there were two types, ladies and gentlemen, count them, 1, 2. So we have the Separatists and we have the Puritans. These are two different types of pilgrims. They both came over on the Mayflower. They both came over to settle New England, but they had a couple of different goals in terms of how, or not how, but why they came here. So let's talk about these guys. So Puritanism, and I've mentioned this in class before, so for those of you who aren't aware, Calvinism is a brand of Protestantism. Just to give you a sense of how Christianity works, because it's going to be pretty important in terms of colonization and subsequent problems that are going to develop. So Christianity started as basically one thing, was Roman Catholicism, right? And then in Europe in 1517, this guy Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. I need to plug in my laptop before it dies on me. Okay, so this guy named Martin Luther in 1517 started the Protestant Reformation, which he challenged the authority and doctrine of the Catholic Church. And so this caused Christianity to branch off into not just one type of Christians, but two types. So you have Roman Catholic, and then you have Protestantism. And then off of Protestantism, you get a bunch of different types, right? So we have Catholic, Protestant, and then lots of Protestant types, like tons of denominations. Calvinism was one of those types, okay? One of those brands, denominations, they are called, of Protestantism. So what was Calvinism? Well, it was a very particular and narrow interpretation of Christian practice. They believed in predestination. So this is contrary to Catholic doctrine, specifically because in Catholic doctrine, there's this stuff called grace, this invisible spiritual currency stuff called grace. And you earn grace by doing good works on earth, right? So if you help people out and you're a good person and you do good things, then you can like earn this grace so that, if you get to, the pearly gates and St. Peter says, listen, you've done some stuff, and you're like, but St. Peter, like, I did all this other good stuff, so can some of that bad stuff be canceled out by the good stuff? And so Catholic doctrine says, yes, it can. Calvinism says, no, you are predestined. It is predetermined. It is already decided before you grace us with your presence on this planet we call Earth, whether or not you are going to heaven. So it doesn't matter how good of a person you are. If you're not supposed to go, guess what? You're not going. So nobody at any point could be certain of their spiritual status, but the idea was that, well, if you're a good person, you're just going to do good works because it's automatic. Like, you won't have to think about it. It'll just come naturally, and that's how you know you're destined to go to heaven. So it's a bit of a circular argument there, but they were devout believers in these concepts. So this gnawing doubt that everyone had, because you didn't know until you died whether you were saved or not. You couldn't know. So this led to people constantly seeking signs of conversion from themselves and each other. So this turned these colonies into one gigantic police state, religious police state. It was pretty intense. So the Puritans, they wanted to reform the Church of England. Okay, they didn't want to separate completely. They just wanted that. They saw what they didn't like was both the Puritans and the Separatists agreed that the Church of England was not good times. Like, there were bad things happening. It was no good, no bueno, But Puritans wanted to reform or purify the church. They didn't want to necessarily completely separate from it. And they didn't like how slow everything was happening in England. I mean, granted, England was going through some stuff. Like, they were having some identity crises, civil wars, right? Some periods without a king. Like, things were kind of a little bit of a mess over there. So they were having some issues. And the Puritans were just impatient. They were just sick of this. Like, they were sick of waiting for it. They're like, you know what? Let's peace out. Let's go to the New World, and we'll start afresh. We'll start our own new little colony, and we'll build from there. And then we can export the perfect society back to England, since they clearly don't know how to get it done. We'll get it done, and then we'll export that process, and then we can get it done over there too. So that was the attitude of the Puritans. Okay, the Separatists, completely separate, pardon the pun, endeavor. Okay, so the Separatist beliefs were that only people who were visible saints, those who could demonstrate that they were in fact predestined to go to heaven, should be admitted to the church. Like, if only certain people are allowed to go to heaven, if only certain people are predestined to go, then why are we letting in the riffraff? Like, why let these like non-saved people like crash our saved party? Like, these people shouldn't be here. Like, kick them out. So, and the Church of England didn't believe in that, and they weren't going to do that. So they said, fine, we'll just completely separate and form our own church in the New World, because you guys, we're not feeling this. We're not on board with what the Church of England is doing. So because the Church of England required everybody be a Church of England member, right? There's no religious freedom over there. You are a member of the Church of England, whether you like it or not, right? There's no option here. There's no debate. There's no discussion. You're a member. So Separatists are like, ew, like these people have cooties. I don't want to be around them. Like, they should not be like, poisoning my church. Like, ew, riffraff, leave, So they left and they went to Massachusetts. Okay, so this is the idea. So they needed a total break from the Church of England, because there was no saving the church, not if they keep letting the riffraff in there. So the Mayflower, so a bunch of different folks, Separatists and Puritans, came over on the Mayflower. So we have 102 people, half were Separatists, half Puritans, right? They negotiated with the Virginia Company, which was the company in command or control of Jamestown, just so you are aware. To settle its jurisdiction. And what that means is they negotiated with the Virginia Company so they could get that tract of land in Massachusetts, and they could start their own colony. So non-separatists included this guy, Captain Miles Standish, who's an interesting character. The Plymouth Bay was way outside the domain of the Virginia Company. So even though they needed permission from the Virginia Company to settle there, the Virginia Company had no say in their day-to-day governing. There was they had nothing to do with it. They didn't give it. You paid us for this stuff, great, bye. Have a nice life. They had bigger problems dealing with Jamestown, so they were not concerned. So they became squatters without legal right to land and specific authority to establish a government. But they did it anyway because they're Puritans. They don't care. So they're going to do it anyway. So that was good times. Mayflower Compact. You must memorize this. You don't need to remember November 11th. That doesn't matter. You need to know what happened in 1620, because that's when they landed at Plymouth Rock. All right. Mayflower Compact represents one of the first quote unquote democratic documents that was produced in the colonies. The Mayflower Compact is important. So remember it, Mayflower Compact, 1620, Puritans, or Pilgrims rather. Pilgrims, Mayflower Compact, 1620. Put it in your brains, memorize it. What was it? Well, it was written and signed before the Pilgrims disembarked from the ship. It was an agreement between all the adult male members to form a crude and simple government that submitted to majority rule. So a direct democracy. This is what we have, a direct democracy. Now, of course, this democracy was based off of following church rules and obeying God, but still a direct democracy. Signed by 41 people, right? And it led to adult male settlers meeting in assemblies. We get the beginnings of self-government, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see from the outset, when these initial colonies were founded, you have self-government forming the basis of the founding of these colonies. So as we approach the Revolutionary War, I want you to remember this, because this need to self-govern and this practice of self-governing would build itself into the identity of all colonists. And that, more than anything else, united them, because not much else did. All right, covenant theology, the covenants, right? So I talked a little bit about this with some students who asked the questions, but here's a more specific breakdown. So covenant of grace is an agreement between Puritan communities and God, right? That you're going to do what you need to do, and you're going to demonstrate that you're a visible saint, right? The social covenant was between members of Puritan communities with each other, okay? So that required mutual watchfulness, right? Keeping up with the Joneses. So you're going to pay attention to every single move that everyone else makes. And you are going to be mindful and attempt to catch them in engaging in inappropriate behavior, which would let you know that they are not, in fact, members of the elect, right? And if you can identify those that aren't members of the elect, that makes it more likely that you are a member of the elect, right? So that this is the idea that was floating about in the early Pilgrim settlements, right? So no toleration of deviance or disorder of any kind, right? And everybody was constantly watching everybody else. So it was pretty hard to get away with stuff. No privacy, none. Like it didn't exist. Like this is right now, right? We have it built in our Constitution, this right to privacy. It's an implied right, right? Yeah, that didn't exist with Puritans, not so much. So the first year was rough. That's less than 50%, folks. I want you to look at that number for a minute. That's less than 50%. That means most people died that first winter. Ooh, that's rough. But nobody chose to leave when the Mayflower went back. They all decided to stay. They wanted to keep it working, keep it going, see what they could do. Because, I mean, really, they left England for very particular reasons. And the reasons they left hadn't resolved themselves. So they decided, no, let's give this a shot. This is just God testing us, right? They had their first Thanksgiving in the fall of 1621. That's where we get all that from. So they survived with fur and fish and lumber. That's really what they ate. So like this idea of like all this ham and turkey and all this other stuff, like they were eating mostly fish. They were on the coast, dude. It was Cape Cod. Like they were eating a lot of fish. Hello. So Plymouth stayed small and economically unimportant because it wasn't their goal. Their goal wasn't to become an economic powerhouse. Their goal was to establish a Calvinist religious sanctuary on earth. That was their goal. So they weren't looking to make tons of money. They were looking to build a society that they wanted to live in. All right. So in 1691, there was only 7,000 people, and that's after, what, 70 years of living there. So that's really not that much of a jump. You'll see the population changes are much larger in other colonies. They did eventually merge because you have Plymouth and then you have Massachusetts Bay, which was a separate colony. But they eventually merged and became Massachusetts. All right, William Bradford. This guy's important. Self-taught scholar, chosen governor of Plymouth over 30 times. So Bradford, Will here was very popular. He was one of those folks that was concerned about these other people, because once people heard the Puritans were coming and there were settlements there, then there were people like, hey, I'll come too, even though I have nothing to do with this Calvinist business. So he was concerned about the influence, the question of bad influences on his Puritan people. So he wanted to keep these outsiders out. He didn't want them coming anywhere near his devout believers that he had 100% complete control over, right? So the MA Bay Colony, it has like a nice ring to it in Massachusetts. It's the abbreviation for Massachusetts, MA Bay, right? So in 1629, non-Separatists got a royal charter, and they formed Massachusetts Bay. All right, that was the other one in addition to Plymouth. Plymouth was first. That was 1620. 1629, they get a royal charter, but MA Bay was officially founded in 1630 with John Winthrop. You're going to need to know about John Winthrop, and we'll get to him in a minute. So they wanted to escape attacks by conservatives in the Church of England. They didn't want to leave the church, just its impurities, right? So these are Puritans, not separatists. So in 1630, 1,000 people set off on 11 well-stocked ships. These people were coming to stay. Remember that. They were coming to stay. They were not coming to make money and leave. They were coming to stay. It's different from Jamestown. Don't lump them together, right? They established a colony, and of course, the modern-day city of Boston was its hub, and that small little township would turn into the city we know and love today, especially in New York, right? There was this great migration of English in the 1630s where a lot of people were fleeing its shores, all right? There was a lot of turmoil in England. Like I said, they're having some identity crises. There was a civil war, period without a king, and it's just back and forth, not good times. So about 70,000 Puritans were like deuces, and they went to America. So you have a lot of people coming. But not all Puritans came to Massachusetts, right? 20,000 came to MA. All right, so John Winthrop, you need to know about this guy. This guy is super, super important. He wrote this work called A Model of Christian Charity, and it's basically like Like it's all things Puritan. It's a summary of all things Puritan. It is an instruction manual, a play-by-play of how one should set up a Puritan society and what that society should look like. This concept of America as this shining city on a hill, a great example for the world, that actually comes from this lore that comes from his work called A Model of Christian Charity. So this guy was a well-off attorney. He did have a manor, which was basically like a big tract of land that he controlled and had people working for him and whatnot. So that's what he wrote, A Model of Christian Charity. Would not be a bit surprised if both him and A Model of Christian Charity show up on this exam. All right, he became the first governor of Massachusetts as a whole colony. And he believed that he had a calling from God, right, which is pretty standard with Puritans. He served as governor, deputy governor for 19 years. So he ran the show there, okay? He was the big man in charge. We shall be as a city on a hill. And that's a quote from A Model of Christian Charity. So, characteristics of New England settlements. This we've talked about in previous presentations, so I'm just going to click through it. I've mentioned this to you before, so that way you have this information so you can see. I want you to have this in your brain so that you can contrast this with what was happening in the southern colonies, in the middle colonies, right? It was very, very different. But that largely was due to their motivations for coming in the first place. So, the patriarchy. We've talked about the patriarchy, right? We're all fighting the patriarchy. Well, this is what it is. This is what we're fighting. If you're fighting it, you should probably know what it is, right? Okay. So, authoritarian male father figures controlled each household, right? And of course, you extend that out to society. Authoritarian male father figures control society, not just your house, right? So, in the context of the Pilgrims, you had ministers, right? Basically, these were churchmen that were controlling everything because church and government were inextricably linked. There was no separation, okay? They would never conceive of such a separation. Like that was not possible. They were linked to each other. So whoever was the lead pastor of their congregation also ran the political unit as well. Rebels. I love rebels. We're going to look at these guys in much more detail in the coming weeks. But Roger Williams is one of my favorites. This guy founded Rhode Island. He was a young popular minister in Salem. And yes, that's the same Salem of the Salem witch trials, which we'll talk about also. So he argued for a full break with the Anglican Church because he didn't like it. He condemned the Massachusetts Bay Charter because it didn't give fair compensation to the Indians for their land. He said, you guys are pulling a fast one, and this is not what God had in mind. God wants us to treat people with respect and treat people well, and this is not okay. Like, you're not following your own doctrine, you're just being greedy humans that are not following God's plan. So that's a lousy charter. That's not fair, right? He denied. Now, this is what's interesting. For a Puritan to be saying this, he denied the authority of civil government to regulate religious behavior. That's like the biggest no-no you could possibly do in Puritan society. Like, because remember, I just said, religion and politics are inextricably linked. You cannot separate them. They are the same thing, right? So here's Roger Williams saying, nah, man, people should be allowed to worship however they want. And you don't have the authority to regulate that. So, of course, that is it's cutting in on John Winthrop's power, so he's not a fan of that. So he was found guilty of preaching new and dangerous opinions, and he was exiled in 1635. And in one short year, you know what he does? He founds Rhode Island. In a year, this man founds his own dang colony, right? This is impressive. Rhode Island, 1636, he went there, founded his own colony. They wanted to send him to England because they didn't want him to found a competing colony, but that didn't work out for them. But he created a lot of freedom in Providence, which would become the capital of Rhode Island, right? He had universal manhood suffrage. Long after his death, they restricted it with a property qualification. But the way Williams founded it, you had universal manhood suffrage, which, of course, to us women, we're like, why not us? But hey, you got to look at the context of the time. And for the context of the time, the fact that every man was able to vote was pretty impressive at that point, right? He opposed special privileges of any kind. He wanted freedom of opportunity for all. Rhode Island became known as the sewer because it was seen by the Puritans as a dumping ground for unbelievers and religious dissenters. It was more liberal than any other colony. So I don't know about you, but I'm a fan of the sewer, and if I had to take my pick of where I'm going to hang out in the sewer because that looks like a much more fun time. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So I was going to continue. In fact, I did continue, and then I realized, you know what? This video is going on too long. So I'm going to pause here, and with the next video, we're going to pick up with Anne Hutchinson, one of my favorite historical figures because she was a badass woman and took it to the man, right? So I'm going to end here. I hope you learned what you needed to, and we'll pick up with Miss Anne Hutchinson in our next video lesson.